Hey, it's good to be with you guys. My name is Adam Flynt, and I get the privilege of serving as the Vice President of Church Planting for Acts 29. And I've been a part of the network for about 14 years now. I planted a church in Florida, which is where our family lives, in 2010, a part of Acts 29. And so I've been around for a while, and now I get to serve in this role, overseeing church planting for Acts 29. And so, as you know, this year, maybe you don't know, this year is Acts 29's 25th anniversary. And so it gave us a chance to kind of stop, pause, look back, and celebrate all that God has done over the last 25 years. And by God's grace, man, God has done some really amazing things over the last 25 years that are worth celebrating. And to look back and say, okay, just because God has done something really remarkable among us over the last 25 years, where are we going for the next 25 years? What does the next 25 years look like for us? And that we wouldn't just assume that what's happened for the last 25 years is gonna work for the next 25 years. And so I stepped into this role about a year ago, and Brian Howard, the president of Acts 29, had done a bunch of work over the last few years of just asking, who are we as a network? Who have we been? Who are we? Who do we want to be? And part of that is the answer was really kind of three things: that we are theologically aligned, that we have always been theologically aligned as a network. And that's really important, that we are orthodox in our faith, evangelical, reformed. That's the way we've always been. That's the way we are. We're not departing from that. And so we're theologically aligned. We relationally collaborate. That we got into this not to go and plant churches as lone rangers. We got in this because we knew we needed some people to come alongside of us. And you'll often hear church planters say that church planting can be some of the loneliest times in their lives, or it can be some of the hardest times to be doing something and pioneering something and feel like it's alone. But we felt like it didn't have to be that way, and it shouldn't be that way. Whether you're the one planting or you're sending somebody out to plant, that we would have people around us who would connect and collaborate in that together. And that's who we've been, that's who we are, and that's who we're gonna continue to be. And that we are a church planting network, so that we're theologically aligned, we're relationally collaborating, and we are a church planting network. Now, what's interesting is there's lots of organizations, lots of networks, denominations that do maybe one or two of those things. One of the things that sets Acts 29 apart and makes Acts 29 so unique is that those three things are happening all the time. And then if you pull any one of those away, Acts 29 isn't who Acts 29 is. And so we're committed to those things going forward, and that's who we are as an organization and in a network. And we have been, and we are committed to being a church planting network, that we plant churches worldwide. We are not gonna stop doing that, and we wanna press harder into that. We wanna be more bold and more courageous, and to see more churches planted all over the world. And so as I stepped into this role about a year ago, that was really encouraging to me, to see that there was some real identity and a real sense of mission and calling that's been there for decades in the network, and that we still feel like that's who we are supposed to be and what we're supposed to be about. Now, one of the things that Brian asked me to do is he said, hey, when it comes to church planting in particular, I want you to take a look back over the last 25 years and then ask, what have we done? How have we planted churches as a network? And is that really the way we want to plant churches going forward? And so we don't have time to kind of get into it, but we did a deep dive into the history, not just of Acts 29, but we did kind of a deep dive culturally to ask what happened in church planting particularly in the United States and the West, but globally. And there were all sorts of factors that led to church planting really exploding over the last 20, 25 years within Acts 29 and across all sorts of networks and denominations. But maybe you've felt this, that is not necessarily the case today in the same way it's been in the last 25 years. And you're seeing it all over the place. Some of the things that we could have assumed in years in the past, people being raised up, where they're coming from, how churches are planting, the economics, all of those sorts of things, all that ground seems to have shifted over the last handful of years. And because of that, we said, here's what we need as a network. We need a clear, intentional, proactive, consistent strategy and direction for church planting. That we need something that's clear, meaning that's something that's understandable, right? That we can all kind of wrap our head around. We don't need an overly complicated, overly engineered direction and system and strategy for church planting, but we need something to be clear so that we all can understand where we're going in this thing. And it needs to be intentional. And we're in a season where we can't just assume church planters are going to show up. I think they still will here and there, but by and large, that era of church planting, no matter what tribe you're a part of, that's over. Kind of the era of like the youth pastor just showing up and saying, hey, I want to plant a church. We are in an era now, and I think going forward, where we are going to have to be much more intentional about raising up the next generation of church planters. And so we can't just assume they're going to show up by and large. And it needs to be proactive. That we can't just wait for things and react in the church planting world. That we need to be on the forefront of seeking out the next generation of church planters and finding them maybe before they even see it in themselves. And so we wanted to be proactive in that. And then we also need it to be consistent, meaning that not that we're just gonna do the same thing the exact same way for the next 25 years, but what we do wanna do is we wanna be consistent, at least for the interim and long haul in this, so that everybody knows where we're going and what we're doing, right? I think some of the reason why maybe some churches in Acts 29 have not been in the church planting game recently is because some things have shifted and changed periodically, and maybe too often, and they're like, I don't know, is this gonna stick? Is it not gonna stick? And so what we wanted to do is to say, hey, we wanna be consistent. We wanna lay out a strategy and a direction for church planting that we intend to run for a while so that you can have confidence that if you step into this, you know it's something that we're gonna be doing for a while. And then the last thing is we want it to be able to be contextualizable, if that's even a word. I don't even know if that's a word, but we'll run with it. That we wanted it to be uniquely Acts 29, and we wanted it that wherever you went in the world, it would feel like Acts 29, but we also wanted something that had some flexibility to say, hey, if you're in East Africa, if you're in Indonesia, if you're in North America, the strategy is basically the same. But you can tweak it and turn it so that it fits the context that you're in. And so that's what we looked at. And what we came up with was this idea of a church planting pipeline. And here's why this is so important. Acts 29 has done some incredible work in the area of church planting in all different ways in church planting, training, resources, assessment, all sorts of different ways. But by and large, those things have operated fairly independent of one another. And what we wanted to do was to take those different things that Acts 29 has done over the years and put them in a sequential pipeline that made sense to see how one thing fits with the next. And one of the verses in scripture that's been rattling around in my brain for about a year now is Proverbs 11:14. And it says, where there is no guidance, a people fall. And what's so interesting about that is often I think we read verses like that or ones that are similar to that, and we think if a person doesn't have a good community, then they're gonna sin. And that may be true, but what that verse really says is this: where there is no guidance, that word literally means where there is no strategic plan and leadership and direction, not just a person, but a people falls, meaning not just that they stumble or they sin, but they'll never be what they were intended to be. So my version of that is, for us is, hey, where church planters, where a church planting network doesn't have a real strategic plan and direction for church planting, not just the church planter, but the entire church plant, will never be all that God intends it to be. And so what we wanted to do is to say, hey, we're not saying this is the perfect strategy or the perfect plan, but here is a plan that we are gonna run on, that we've thought through and we can give guidance to, that hopefully our churches in the network and church planters can thrive on, that it's trellis on which the vine can grow. And so I think we have a graph. I just wanna show you, this is kind of a real basic picture of what the church planting pipeline looks like. And so if you look over here on the left, you'll see recruiting. Now, don't get too caught up on the years, but if you look at the bottom, you'll see it kind of goes from -2 years to +3 or 4 years. That's about a 6-year timeline. And most of the studies show that churches need to be as close to self-sustaining financially as they can be in the North American context within about 6 years, give or take a few years, or the odds that they ever will be drastically fall off. And if you have ever planted a church and tried to raise money after the first couple years, you know how hard it is to do that years later after planting. And so we kind of said, hey, there's about a 6-year window where we want to, how do you take somebody who raises their hand and says, hey, I think I'm interested in church planting? Or if you identify somebody and maybe they don't even raise your hand, but you go, I see it in them. How do you take that person and then fast forward about 6 years later and a church has been planted and that church is self-funded, self-governed, and has the ability to be self-replicating, meaning they have the ability to get into the church planting game. And so that's what this represents. And so if you look over here on the left, it starts with recruiting or identifying church planters. And we want to proactively identify potential church planters. Again, like I said earlier, we don't just want to wait for them to come. We as a network and as churches and areas and regions, we want to be actively looking for the next potential church planter, which means we want to be looking for those guys who are, maybe they're like a medical sales rep, or maybe they're somewhere on your staff, or maybe they're an elder with you. And in some cases, they're gonna raise their hand and say, hey, I'm really interested in it. In other cases, you all will spot them and you'll see it in them before they ever see it in themselves. And so we want, as a network, to provide some infrastructure so that when you identify that person, you have a place to bring them into and some steps for them to take. And so when we identify those folks, the next step in here is training. Now, if you've been around Acts 29 for a while, often the training piece was kind of scattered throughout. And there will always be conferences and events like this that are training. But when you think particular to preparing somebody to plant, I did work overseas with church planters for about a decade. And one of the things that, especially in Africa and some other places, that they did was they just didn't assume that somebody that they identified as a potential church planter was ready to go to assessment. They owned the preparation of church planters to get them ready for assessment and then get them ready to plant. And so I think we are heading in the same direction where we need to back our training up. And we're gonna train in two ways. We're gonna train people so that when they go to assessment, they're ready to go to assessment. So, teach to the test. We're gonna unapologetically teach to the test. We're gonna train people so that when they show up to assessment, they're prepared to be there. And we're training so that they're prepared to plant a church. And training is gonna happen in two ways. One is that we are gonna provide an apprenticeship. We just rolled this out in September of this year. And the apprenticeship is a chance for potential church planters to discern their calling to church planting. The apprenticeship is not training to church plant. The apprenticeship it's 6 modules around our core competencies. It's exposure to church planting. It can be done in about 6 months. It's delivered online on our Equip platform. You can use it, you can access it. It has some reading, it has some podcasts, it has some videos. There's discussion questions that are out there. And so what it provides is all of the training that you would need to help guide somebody in bringing clarity around their sense of call. And so really, if you see that, so you identify somebody and then you say, hey, let's spend some time looking at your calling and getting clarity of call. And the win here is that somebody would either say, yes, I'm called to church planting, or no, I'm not called to church planting. Those are both wins in this phase of training. The next part of training is a residency program. The residency program is being developed right now. It should be out in January 2025. And again, it's gonna be done in modules, so you can run it from somewhere about 1 year to 2 years is how long it would take. Each module corresponds to one of the core competencies of church planting for Acts 29. And if you think kind of head, heart, and hands, like in training, there's some stuff you need to learn. There's some things you need to know in order to plant a church. And that's the head piece. So reading, studying, writing, things like that. There's some heart things that we need to get ready if we're gonna plant churches, right? So it isn't just, do you know about preaching? Have you read Brian Chappell's book on preaching? But why do you wanna preach so badly? What is it inside of you that hungers for that so much? Or why are you so scared of it, right? You need to dig around in there and figure out what's going on inside your heart and relative to those things. And then hands, like practical training to get better at it. So reps preaching and reviewing it and going over it and getting better and learning how to do that. And so each module kind of revolves around head, heart, and hands, each of the core competencies. And again, it's delivered online. It'll be delivered online through our Equip platform. And you can take it. And here's the thing, with the apprenticeship and the residency, what we want to do is provide you with these 2 sets of training, and then you can run it. You can run it stock the way it is, or you can take it and go, I don't like that. I want to change that. I want to make this better for our context. And you are totally free to do that. But what we wanted to do was to set your church up with some tools so that you can raise up church planters. And we kind of wanted to do the heavy lifting of that for you. And so that's the residency that's going on in there. The residency is training for church planting. And a lot of the pieces that are in the residency will, if you kind of think of it like a year 0, it will help church planters be set up in order to then go and start to form their core groups and their launch team and do the work on the ground. So we'll help them form their church incorporation and get bank accounts and set up websites and do mission, vision, values, bylaws, all those sorts of things, all the kind of behind the scenes groundwork along with all of the training. And then they'll be able to go to assessment. And then from there, that'll be refined and they'll find the things that they need to work on and tweak and change and get better at, and then move on into church planting. And so that's the residency and training. And if the training is done well, it should make assessment seamless. Our hope is that men and their wives who come to assessment don't just show up to see if they're ready. We want them to come feeling like, okay, we're prepared, our sending church thinks we're prepared, and we've done residency, we've done training, and here we are, and it's a time for the network to serve those church planters and their wives. It's to put another set of eyes on them. The assessment has been one of the central pieces of Acts 29. It really has been one of the greatest things that God has done inside of our network to help around church planting. But we think it needs for the next season, not to diminish in importance at all. It is staying as important as it has ever been. We just think it needs to fit in a broader pipeline. And so you'll go to assessment and you'll work through mission, vision, values, character, marriage, all of those things. Preaching, we'll look at, prospectus and help with funding and all of those sorts of things that we do at assessment. And then coming out of assessment, there'll either be a recommendation to plant or a recommendation not to plant. And if you get recommended to plant, there'll be all sorts of conditions that we will put alongside of people that come to plant. And so this is what moves out of assessment and into this coaching and cohort phase. Now, I don't know, everybody's experience in Acts 29 is unique and different. When I planted, I went through assessment. We went down to Orlando, Florida, did our assessment. It was about 2009, 2010. We got done. We got an assessment report sent to us with a handful of conditions. And then the letter said, let us know when you've completed all the conditions. And that was it. I was like, oh, okay. So kind of went back, worked on the conditions over the next handful of months, and then sent off an email and said, we're done. And I got a great, you're in. And I was like, okay. It felt really lonely to me. I didn't know if I was doing them good enough. I didn't know exactly how I was supposed to do them. That was our experience. But here's the thing. Somebody coming out of assessment, that will never be their experience in Acts 29 from this point forward. Everybody who comes through assessment and is recommended to plant, no matter how many conditions you have, how few conditions you have, everybody coming out of assessment will be placed into a cohort. And there's actually two of them. The first cohort will last 2 years coming out of assessment, and it's kind of a post-assessment launch cohort. And what this is meant to do is to say, okay, hey, everybody from the last couple assessments, you guys are all gonna get into a cohort together. We're gonna have an experienced, trained coach from Acts 29 that's gonna lead your cohort for the next couple years. You're gonna meet in person twice a year. And the goal of that cohort is to coach you with the experienced coach and peer-to-peer coaching to get you through your assessment conditions, to work on those things together, and so that you'll launch in a really healthy, thriving way. And so those two things are predominantly what that first cohort is, and it lasts about 2 years. The next cohort you'll see at the very end in the light blue. That cohort, we don't really have a good name for it. Finishing cohort kind of sounds like finishing school and manners. I don't think it's really a good name, but you know what I'm talking about here. The goal of that cohort is to help you become self-funded, self-governed, and the ability to be self-replicating. That what we want, when you finish that second cohort, you will have been in this pipeline for about 6 years. And like I said at the beginning, our goal at this point, in a real concerted way in this last cohort, is to help guys move from that kind of partially internal giving, partially external fundraising, get them off external fundraising, learn how to disciple people from within their congregation so that the congregation can be self-sustaining in terms of funding, and so that church plants can become self-governed. Now, anybody that's planted a church or been around church planters knows there's 2 ditches when it comes to forming elder boards in a church plant. One is you can wait too long, which I think if you kind of rewind 10 or 15 years ago was kind of the predominant way a bunch of us acted. It was like, we believe in elders, we think they're great, in the future, let me do what I need to do right now before we complicate it with a bunch of other leaders in here. And you can actually wait too long to get elders. But the other ditch is you can hurry up and get too many elders too soon. Like you don't even have a church yet and you've got 6 elders. Like what are they elding? You don't even have a church. They may have been elders at their church, but they were eldering that church. You're not that church anymore. And so I'm not saying that it's bad to have sending churches send you with elders, but what we want to do is help that church plant navigate the best way forward in terms of installing an elder team or an elder board. And so we want to help them not fall into those 2 ditches. And so we'll help them get a provisional leadership team, learn how to lead an elder group, learn how to develop elders, let them make mistakes on the provisional team, and then transition that over to an internal set of elders. And then finally, we think if we can do those 2 things, that churches will be set up in Acts 29 to be able to be self-replicating. Meaning they'll be in a healthy place where if they identify somebody, they'll be able to go back to the beginning of this pipeline and walk with somebody through this part of the pipeline again. Or if they don't have somebody, they'll be able to join up with other churches in Acts 29 in their area or somewhere in the world and say, hey, because of our 10% that we've committed to giving, and because we are on the way or we are self-sufficient in terms of internal funding, we're able to partner financially and help fund a church plant that comes behind us. And so at that point, our hope and our goal is that they would kind of graduate out of church planting and they would just be a really healthy young church. And so Acts 29, there's the church planting division, and then there's the churches division. Justin Anderson is leading that area. And so my goal and our commitment together is that we would raise up these church planters and then graduate them kind of into the churches division, and then they would start it all over with people that they identify. The other piece of this is, and it doesn't really fit into the pipeline all that cleanly, but what we are doing is we have a thing called the resource suite. And what we have started doing in the last, about 9 months is we've been contacting some of the best ministries, organizations, businesses that we know to say, hey, would you partner with us and help us plant churches? So we've gone out and we've found web designers, graphic designers, videographers, we've found attorneys, virtual XP services, all different kinds, financial services, all different kinds of services. And these people have said, yeah, we would love to partner with you. And we have one company that does curriculum, one ministry that does curriculum, and they've just said for 2 years, you can have our kids' curriculum for free for your church planters. And so we're gonna be rolling out a new section of the website that's gonna have all of these resources on it, along with a bunch of others like sample bylaws and sermon series plans and all kinds of things like that that are just gonna be tools to help the network at large, but church plants in particular. So that resource is coming. We think that we're getting about 5 times the value out of our partners, meaning they're giving us their services either for free or probably at about 20% of what they would actually charge us. And so it is deeply, deeply discounted because they love church planting, they love what we're doing, and they want to be a part of it. So that resource suite is coming. And then the last thing is, as a network, we all contribute 2% to Acts 29 that helps kind of do all of this sort of stuff. And then we commit 8% to church planting. That 8%, because we know what the 2% represents, because it comes in, we know it's just a math problem. We know what the 8% represents. And here's the thing about the 8%. That 8% represents, on the conservative side, about $15 or $16 million a year. A year. which means that no church planter should ever go underfunded in Acts 29. But what it also means is that you and I, who are in churches that have committed to giving that 8%, we actually need to open up our hands and give it away. Don't hoard it. This is talents. Don't bury the talent. If you've committed 8%, if we would all just freely give away 2 church plants within Acts 29, there would be $15 million a year flowing out, which means when your guy gets ready to plant, they would have access to that $15 million. And so if I could beg or plead with you on anything today, is take that 8% and unleash it. Just give it away. And I'm telling you, the people in your congregation will love it. It will be so encouraging to them to hear the stories of partnership in there. And it will help you as you then later launch. And so you'll hear more about activating kind of that 8% in the years to come. And so this is the church planting pipeline. This is the play we're gonna run. This is the direction we're heading. And whether it's here in the States or it's somewhere else in the world, we're gonna be running this basic pipeline all over the world. And again, there's areas where it'll be tweaked and contextualized and all that, and we want that, and we're gonna celebrate that. But no matter where you go around the world in Acts 29, hopefully you'll be able to say, hey, where are you in the church planting pipeline? And people will understand what that means, and they'll be able to partner and participate together in that. All right? That's the pipeline.